I will be talking about engineered wood products in New Zealand, recent survey results, and also share with you some existing resources. Part of that is sort of in due to the findings from the surveys. So what I'll be talking about today, just kind of an overview. Little bit about what engineered wood products are. I think for a lot of you, this will be information you're already quite familiar with, but just to let you know what's out there, what the range of products are really, because it seems like there's more becoming available as time goes on. We have done a couple of surveys over the past few years, so I'll talk about those, and those are on specifically around engineered wood products. I'm imagining some of you probably participated, and thanks if you did. We'll talk about the two surveys so far and some of the comparisons and results, findings, and some of the recommendations that came from analyzing that survey data. Talk about the current resources in terms of what's out there for engineered wood products, so codes and standards. What are the manufacturers providing? A bit about brands and what we've got on the go, and then some other organizations that are out there as well. So have a little summary at the end, and just a nod to what we're going to be looking at in the future. So it's quite a range of timber composite materials that we've got with engineered wood products. If we look at primarily the structural applications, we're looking at LVL, glulam, CLT. We've also now got parallel laminated timber, which is sort of like, it's a panel product like CLT, but it's actually more like glulam that's been done in a panel type format. So that's being manufactured by Taranaki Pine, and I think Woodspan is the sort of moniker they're using for that. And of course, there's finger jointed timber, which gets used in some of these different applications. So we've got a range. Some of the industries in New Zealand are quite mature, others are relatively new, but at the moment, this is a pretty good, snapshot of what we've got available. There's also panel products. So obviously plywood, oriented strand board is used a bit more overseas, but is starting to make some appearances, particularly with some composite products like structural insulated panels. There's strand board, which we do make here in New Zealand, as well as things like particle and fiber cement. So these all have different roles to play, some of them in more residential type structures, but I'd say they all have a role as well in multi-story timber buildings that we're seeing with a bit more regularity these days. As well as the products, we can also then put those different products together and come up with products and systems, things like the composite eye joists, which I'm assuming you're familiar with. There's structural insulated panels. If you have been keeping up with all the TDS webinars, I did one on SIPs last year, and that's an ongoing research project. There's wood plastic composites. We don't make too many of these in New Zealand, but they do come in from overseas and can have a range of applications as well. There's timber concrete composites. There's the press lam system of post-tension timber, as well as a number of different types of stress skin panels and box beams. And those sort of last three there all feed into more the prefabricated type systems. Even getting to the point where there's rooms and houses and modules being manufactured off-site and then assembled on-site. And the different types of prefabrication certainly have opportunities there for using engineered wood products. And again, like we're seeing with some of the other things, that the prefabrication is taking on a bit more of a prominent role in the landscape these days, as more and more people see the advantages of being able to do as much manufacturing off-site as possible. And fortunately, engineered wood products fit very well within that paradigm. So a little bit on these surveys. We did a survey back in 2019 that was reported on, and that was purely a brands sort of facilitated activity. We did, get some help from others in the in the timber area to help with the designing the survey and some of that sort of thing, but it was funded essentially through brands. More recently, in 2022, we did a follow-up to that. It was through a collaboration with the Mid-Rise Wood Construction Partnership, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But essentially, they wanted to replicate the 2019 survey, and in the end, ended up getting some funding from brands to do that. So it was a collaborative effort. The questions a little bit different, but very, very similar to the 2019 one. Ended up getting 265 respondents, which was good. We did have to make a couple of pushes for that, but in the end, we cast a pretty wide net across the industry, and you can see some of the participants that we heard back from in that chart to the right there. But yeah, we had an initial request for participation. And after doing that and having the survey open for about a month and a half, we really felt like we needed more respondents. So we did kind of a second round of requests, asked even more organizations. I mean, we ended up talking to obviously Timber Design Society, but CSOC and the building officials and architects, and tried to get as many from the building industries that we could. So in the end, got the 265 and felt that was a pretty good representation there. The nice thing about the responses is that a lot of people included comments, so that was very helpful in starting to understand some of the issues around the uptake and usage of engineered wood products. The plan is to repeat that survey in the next over the next 4 years, 2 more times. The whole idea with this is to get a more longitudinal perspective on the industry, how things are changing, if they're changing, and what activities and initiatives might need to be accelerated or changed. There is a report as well. This one is sitting on the Mid-Rise Wood website, and you can see the address down there. So very similar in some ways to the original report, but obviously with some tweaks and some updates to the information. So as I said, the current survey, or the more recent one, was based on the 2019 survey. We tried to be a bit smarter about it. And so when we looked at not just the questions, but also the answers that we got, we were able to rephrase them and put them in some ways that we think made it a little bit easier to take the 2022 survey. And also one of the ideas there was also to make it easier to analyze. Surveys are one of those things. If you don't ask the questions in the right ways, the answers you get can be quite difficult to interpret. So I'd have to say, I think we definitely made some improvements, and I certainly found the analysis for the more recent survey to be a bit more straightforward, which is great. Again, the questions and the theme, or the general questions that were asked in the survey, a lot about barriers, a lot about what products are being used, how are they being used, are there barriers, kind of like if you're not using them, why not, how can the uptake be increased, and essentially ways in which we could sort of facilitate increased uptake of engineered wood products. As I mentioned, we got lots of comments, so there were lots of opportunities for people to tell us what they thought. In the end, we had to distill that down into some major themes, and they were very similar to 2019. So in some ways, they say that, a lot of the things that were concerns back then still exist, but there definitely were some changes as well. I guess cost is probably always going to be a potential barrier, especially as things get tighter, and inflation issues and all this sort of stuff. So everybody often cites that as a potential barrier. Along with that, there's a lot of potential benefits. So it's one of those things where a little bit of cost benefit analysis helps. Availability was still perceived, although I think not as much of a barrier as it was back in 2019. Certainly the currency of our standards and regulations were cited as important and as a something that needed to be considered. I guess the timing of the survey didn't take into account the fact that later in the year we did have 1720.1 published, and that was certainly mentioned that we needed to update 3603, and now it has been. Education, helping people get the information that they need was important, as well as training, and that's training engineers, architects, builders. A bit more training needed across the sector, and that seemed to be one of the issues that was a bit more important this time around. The information that people talked about, definitely environmental impacts, seem to have a much more important role, or a much more prolific kind of prominent role, I would say. And that's no surprise considering the regulatory changes that have been occurring over the past year or so. But definitely people want to know about the products. They want to know how they perform, how they can use them for design. Durability with timber products is always an issue, as well as how they can be substituted, and even some questions around standardization, which some of the other industries probably do a little bit more effectively than timber. But those are all the things that really came out as major themes. From that, we looked at it and thought, well, what sort of recommendations would we make around this? And again, this was in collaboration with the Mid-Rise Wood Program, where we said, well, certainly developing data on the economic implications of using engineered wood products. So, comparing them with other typically used materials, and more focus on multi-story building applications, because that seemed to be quite important in the survey results. But definitely wanting to know how they performed and how they could be compared, so that I think people can make more informed decisions moving forward. Along with the environmental stuff, the comprehensive life cycle analysis and environmental impact data around engineered wood products. And I think fortunately we are, more of that is coming all the time, but understanding the embodied energy as well as the operational. So not just what carbon can be lowered using timber as a material, but also how do timber buildings perform over their lifetime. So it's getting more and more important to have a good handle on both of those, as well as the carbon sequestered, which obviously for timber is usually a win, but understanding how that works and what the different implications of different products are along those lines. Continue with detailed case studies. The difference between 2019, or one of them between the two surveys, was that we now have a lot more case studies out there, and that came through in the surveys. But we would say, recommendation wise, to continue with those, and look at those buildings that have a significant amount of engineered wood products, and try to get some comprehensive understanding, environmental benefits, but the design, the cost of design using those materials, because sometimes when we're using materials, if people are struggling to find information, the design itself can cost more. So trying to get a kind of a holistic understanding of the effects of using those materials as part of the case study. What we're doing today, webinars, seminars. Fortunately, we're able these days to get out and about a bit more. So I'm hoping that you're all taking advantage of the range of opportunities out there. I know this year in particular, it seems like there's an awful lot of events, things that are happening for timber buildings. So that seems to be happening sort of in the background anyway. But I guess in terms of recommendations, trying to engage with a wide range of building sector players. So sometimes it feels a little bit like we're talking amongst ourselves, that we already are all behind timber, but we need to widen the audience a little bit and talk about specific applications of engineered wood products, demonstrations, not just case studies, but the tools that are available, and even guidance on using those tools. And sharing those case study findings, which from what Namir said about the upcoming webinars, that also is happening. So yeah, and looking to the general public, building owners, end users, developers, folks that may not have timber on their radar as much and aren't already convinced, those are the ones that we really need to try to share some of this information with. And that's when having that cost information and comparative data can be quite useful, because if people say, well, what's the difference between timber, steel, and concrete, having some of that stuff quantified can be quite important. So along with just, more design, more product information, specific products, but the thing that bubbled up in the more recent survey was definitely CLT was seen as something that needed more information, more design tools, and just people wanted to know more about it. So comparisons, I've already kind of mentioned a number of these, but the themes were essentially the same, cost, availability, standards, regulation, and the whole education knowledge aspects. Those didn't really change that much. I think the degree to which some of them were critical has shifted a bit. There were fewer respondents, as I mentioned, with the more recent survey. The demographic shifted a little bit. The previous survey had more architects, whereas this time around we had more engineers. The case studies, as I mentioned, do seem to be helping. They are helping inform people. And also, there weren't people saying we need case studies. They were saying, okay, we need case studies, but we need more of them, and we need them to be, a bit more specific or a bit more targeted. Certainly the environmental stuff was more important in the more recent survey, and training was something that was more of a focus. So not just information, but how to use the information, how to use the design tools, and where does it make sense to use and maybe even not use engineered wood products. So training was more important. As I mentioned, CLT has obviously grown, the interest there has grown. And there was more of a focus on trying to get more research and education at the university level. So training people, for the various roles that might be needed, architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, and builders even, at the university level, so that when they leave university, they already know about timber and they can maybe get involved with the research as well. So those were some of the differences. As I said, definitely a lot of similarities, but with some of the details a little bit different. So what have we got out there in terms of resources? Again, I think most of you will be familiar with our existing codes and standards. 3604 is undergoing revision currently. They have expanded the scope a bit, so that's going to be important. 3603, obviously, we have the new 1720.1 published. It's not cited in the building code, but it will be. That has already been the topic of discussion for a couple of webinars. I think Pierre was talking about connections last month. So again, if you keep your eyes open, there will be more on the differences. And then as that becomes cited, it will also become a bit more important to get some training around that as well. Unfortunately, 3602 and 3640 did not get revised. But in terms of durability, they're still the go-to, and the ones that we've had since 2003 are still current. And there's the building code as well. So, there are shifts there to keep your eyes on, whether it's in, claddings, moisture, fire, insulation, obviously, is a big one that is getting looked at now. So those are the things that we haven't, in part of the regulatory framework. I didn't want to be product specific, so I just wanted to note that, the various fabricators, manufacturers of the products that we have in New Zealand have lots of technical literature. So if you're not sure how to work with a particular product, but you know what you want, get in touch with them. They have, tables, they have carbon information, durability information. Some of them also have design software, aimed at different levels, whether you're quite a, advanced engineer or just getting started. So there is a lot out there from the manufacturers. Obviously, it's important to them that people know how to use their stuff properly, and they're quite good at getting that out there. So I didn't list anybody in particular, but needless to say, that goes for the engineered wood products, but also components, the stuff that we use to put buildings together, the fixings, the fastenings, the bracketry. They also have literature, software, and even the overseas companies are working to make sure that they have New Zealand specific information. So another opportunity there to be able to design within the framework of what's available. Also, for those products that do have things like code mark or brands appraisals, they not only have technical information, but they can also help explain how those products fit within the building code compliance pathway. So it's just another opportunity that it goes a little bit beyond saying, yep, that's the sheer capacity of those screws, to saying yes, and they will also perform as they need to over the long term, or whatever happens to be. Just carrying on more resources, obviously me working at brands, I've got a pretty close relationship with what happens there, but the website has been updated. There's lots of publications, tools, calculators. The original 2019 survey report is there, as well as a range of life cycle carbon evaluation stuff, and of course research, which is what I focus on. I won't, spend too much time here, but just saying that there is a range of stuff available. The study reports is more for the research end of things. And they also do what's called a Research Now, which is a 2 to 5 page summary of a research report. So instead of reading, 200 pages, you can get a nice digestible summary that gives you the highlights. And then from there, if you need data or something like that, you can go to the report itself. They do bulletins on a range of topics related to timber stuff. I sort of pulled out the timber related things, but there is a new one this year on engineered wood products, and it's pretty high level. So if you're already quite well familiar with engineered wood products, it may not be that useful, but if you if it's somewhat new to you, then it might be helpful. And it's always just another resource that we can point towards when trying to, share the story about timber with people. There are some design and building guides as well. There's the multi-story light timber frame guide that came out in 2019, as well as guides around selecting timber. If you're using 3604 or doing light timber framing, there's also the engineering basis of 3604, which is quite a useful document. There are e-learning modules, so sort of like webinars or things that you can sort of do at home. Good practice guides. More on the testing and research, there's evaluation methods. And what that might be helpful is, if you come across some test data, by having access to the actual method used for evaluating it, you can sometimes, just get a better understanding of what was tested, how the results impact the building, and what more you might need to know. And of course, P21, which we are aware is for, bracing evaluations for use with 3604. And there's also, technical papers around fire resistance, and some of that is timber specific. And yeah, the list sort of goes on here. I guess what I get to is also looking at seminars, webinars. I get involved with those, but we also have folks that look at various aspects of buildings. So for timber buildings, it could be, the type of timber, it could be bracing. There's currently a medium density housing roadshow underway. I think there's still a couple installments of that to go, but that's looking at timber, rather medium density, buildings in a bit broader context. A lot of it's around a book by Guy Marriage from Vic Uni called Medium. And so it's got him as well as a few other folks, including one of our fire engineers, talking about the various issues with medium density housing and how to work through some of those. I would say probably over the years, we've done a lot at brands around houses. So, that's fallen into the timber area, but more and more the multi-story, the commercial buildings are also becoming part of our, work streams and research and documentation and publication. So it's all kind of moving in that direction as well. There are some tools, calculators. There's a number of maps there for different aspects of design. We used to have a lintel and beam calculator that actually would provide a PS1. Due to some different software issues, it's essentially just a spreadsheet now. So it's something that will help you with the design, but in the end, the sort of sign off will be up to you or to your engineer. And there's also BRISC, which is a software fire simulation tool. I'll talk about that in a minute. I did a presentation for TDS last year on the various life cycle analysis tools that we have at brands, so I won't go into much detail. What I would say is they're all available on the website. They're free. LCA Quick is the big one that looks at whole of life evaluation. It's based on EPD, or those environmental product declaration data. It gets updated. They do provide training, so if it's something you think you want to use, there is help available. And also LCA Quick provides a lot, but it's for the scenario where you know a lot about your building and you're at a point in the design where you've got a BIM model and you know what materials you're going to be using. So it's one of those things that you use a bit further down the line. That was acknowledged. And what it meant for brands was that they needed to develop some other tools that could be used at different stages of design, maybe not when you know it all already, but when you're trying to figure out what you want to do. Do we want to use timber? What kind of timber? What kind of products do we want to include? And some of these other tools that I've got listed here can help with some of that decision making. There's preliminary tools to compare different systems. A lot of these look mostly at embodied energy, but some residential, some for bigger buildings. So there's a range of tools. They're all pretty well described there, but there is a good range now beyond just LCA Quick to be able to help with some decision making. We also have a program on environmental transitioning to a zero built carbon environment. Programs are more collections of collections of projects. So it really is intended to support the industry to kind of lead their own transition. So there's resources available, opportunities to get involved, and there's some website as well as an email there if you want to find out more about it. But the whole idea is sort of aligning with MB's objectives about reducing our carbon footprints and leading the industry to help themselves do that. Got a big fire program and end up doing some fire or timber specific things at brands at times. There's BRISC. It's just software. It's constantly updated. It's been in use for quite a few years now and continues to get pretty good traction. Have some recent enhancements, things where you can evaluate mass timber, different timber surfaces, how that contributes to your fuel loads. It looks at growth, fully developed and decay phases of the fire. So it's, again, pretty comprehensive and also includes some charring depth info. So again, it's not timber specific, but it has the ability to be used for timber buildings. You may be aware that there's a global document now on the fire safe use of wood in buildings. Andy Buchanan and some others from New Zealand contributed to that. So quite useful there, and brands also supported that. It wasn't a brands document, but certainly were supportive of it. For that program, I mentioned the environmental program. We also have a densified housing program in the fire department that looks at things like the fire safe use of timber. So helping, further define calculation models for mass timber. There was some work done with UC on post-tension beam column connections. So full-scale fire tests were done there. And also some work around timber linings and early fire hazards. Combustible facades and the contributions of timber to external fire spread. So a couple things around cladding and the interaction between timber framing and cladding are ongoing projects. I'm excited to say that we have a new fire lab being constructed as we speak, and we will be able to do full-scale facade tests inside, whereas now you can see from the image there we do them outside. But the website listed there has a lot of these projects, and it's probably one of the best parts of the brand's website is that the fire research folks have put together a good summary of their work. So I encourage you, if you have some fire issues you want to consider, check it out. Also, some work on corrosion. I won't dwell there because Zhengwei did a webinar for TDS on that last year as well, but that's another area we look at. For materials, there's adhesives, durability of timber, things like what's going on in wall cavity subfloor spaces, as well as looking at some of the different products, so thermally modified timber, and how we can evaluate how effective some of that durability has been. All of those have either build articles or research papers that you can check out. And of course, would have to mention the structural stuff. There's SIPs, which I did a webinar on for TDS last year. A lot of these things have been discussed. There's that multi-story light timber frame guideline, and we're currently working on some hybrid light timber frame systems. So in conjunction with either, CLT, LVL, steel, concrete, different foundations, that sort of thing. And also a bit of work getting started on sloping site foundations, particularly around Wellington. That's a much more residentially focused project, but essentially trying to come up with some guidance for subfloor remediation, that sort of thing. Beyond brands, we've got Stick, which you would remember is the Structural Timber Innovation Company, and they developed some guidelines which are out there, and you can find those at the different websites listed there. So some of the topics, obviously the post-tension timber, but also things like diaphragms and even fire performance. Andy's guide is still in use, still relevant. It was based on 3603, so obviously with the new standard, some things will change there. Whether or not that is going to be sort of revised or updated, I'm not sure of at this moment, but certainly watch that space. The universities also do quite a bit with timber. University of Canterbury has done a lot of work over the past few years, looking at different aspects of CLT. More recently, they've been looking at base isolation of houses, and some of this will be discussed at the upcoming NZSEE conference next month. Similarly, with Auckland University, they've looked at CLT floors and different seismic dampers, but also LVL, holes, notches, reinforcement of those kinds of systems, as well as wood waste and reuse of timber. So looking kind of in that environmental space as well. AUT, the resilient slip friction joints, so the tectonicus system and how that integrates with timber buildings has been a focus. And I mentioned Vic University as well here in Wellington. They've had a number of projects on prefabricated engineered wood product systems. The one that comes to mind is the X-frame that Jed Finch came up with, but also the work by Guy Marriage, as I mentioned, was a focus for the recent medium density housing roadshow that Brands is doing. So that there is some work going on there as well. I guess it's more kind of in the architecture space, but still very relevant. Probably don't need to say too much about the Timber Design Society other than the website is being updated now. Obviously, you're familiar if you're catching this webinar, but there's also the journal, and over the past couple of years, we've introduced tech notes, which are intended for practitioners. There was a road show last year. Hopefully you were able to catch that, and there will be more in the future. And obviously the webinar series has been very successful. So WPMA also has some resources. They've got the series of design guides. There's 15 or 16 of them, and they are available for download. As well as they have info on the EPDs, the environmental product declarations, which feed into those different environmental footprinting calculators that are out there. So a couple different resources there. I guess one of the most exciting things is the Timber Design Center. I do think that Robert Finch did a webinar for TDS last year talking about it, but it was a collaborative effort between TDS, Brands, Scion, WPMA, and funded through MPI, and basically trying to look at all things timber and share knowledge and create a bit of a one-stop shop for information around using timber in buildings. And they also have some advisory capability as well. So the survey I mentioned was a collaboration with the Mid-Rise Wood Construction Partnership, which is a collaboration of Red Stag and MPI. They have a good website with quite a few resources there as well, and they're doing a lot with the case studies. So Clearwater Keys is probably the big one down in Christchurch, but they're also looking at funding some projects in part to try to, sort of get a larger pool of case studies so that that knowledge can be shared. And they also are doing some events. I think even next week or the week after, there will be a Woodworks event down in Christchurch, and then there will be one later in the year in Rotorua as well. And that's where Woodworks comes into it. You're probably familiar with Scion. They tend to work more in the durability processing space, but also environmental issues and innovating things that we can do with timber. So Engineering New Zealand also has a technical groups, obviously TDS, but CSOC, NZSEE, and the general practitioners. So again, those aren't going to be timber specific, but there's more and more engagement and collaboration happening with those groups as well. Also, we often find that if we don't have a New Zealand solution for some of our timber design aspects, there's a lot of things going on globally. Here's a few organizations. I know that for the multi-story light timber frame guide, we definitely tapped into some of these resources, and they're very useful. So a lot of things going on globally relate quite well to what we're doing here in New Zealand, and sometimes it's just a matter of knowing, what's out there. So just wanted to share some of these overseas opportunities as well. And obviously Wood Solutions next door in Australia, they've got lots of design guides, and they do a webinar series as well. So definitely a good place to look for information. So just in brief, talked about the survey. Clearly, there are some areas for improvement, and I think the resources and the things that are happening are already moving in that direction. The webinars, the road shows. My opinion is that there is an abundance of resource. It's just a matter sometimes of connecting the people who need the information with the people that have it. So hopefully Timber Design Center, Timber Design Society, as well as the other organizations can help with that. There will be follow-up surveys, again, trying to capture more longitudinally what's happening. But with that, I would say if you're able to participate, please do. And thank you for your attention. If I can answer questions, just let me know.
Thank you very much, David. That was really very thorough and very interesting talk. Like massive effort made to collate results from the industry about engineered products such as LVL and glue. That's really helping students, helping engineers, helping university, everywhere. It's massive effort. Well, I don't know what to say, to be honest. Great effort. Now, I would like to pass on to my colleague Daniel Moroder, TDS President, to facilitate questions and answers. Daniel, please.
Thank you, Namir, and obviously thank you, David, for your excellent presentation. It's always great to see what the industry has to say, and someone like you distilling all that and summarizing it and providing a bit of a feedback. And I also really appreciate, like Namir, the second part of your presentation, providing this summary. And in fact, there is more than one person asking if these resources can be made available in form of a PDF. So perhaps, David, if you are okay with this, if you can PDF at least part of your slides and send them to the attendees, that might be well appreciated, so that people have all of that written down rather than going back to the webinar recording itself. Now,
yep,
before
I'm happy to do that, Daniel.
Perfect. So we can organize that with Engineering New Zealand and have that sorted. Now, before we go into the questions, there's not many at the moment, so we probably hopefully get some more. I'm just back from the TDS and CSOC seminar, which was yesterday in Christchurch and the day prior in Queenstown, and there will be more Nelson, Wellington, Hamilton, and Auckland later this week and next week. Very successful, good presentations from others, and there was really good feedback. So I think we're doing the right thing, and there's definitely need for more educating and sharing information. But it's really great to see the interest from industry out there and the uptake, considering there are a lot of new faces in the audience too. So having said that, David, there's a few questions which I'm gonna go through now, and hopefully you can provide answer. And one will be the updated 3604 include structural member sizing options using engineered wood products?
It's a good question. I think the answer is yes. I'm not 100% sure, but I thought they were going to try to include some engineered wood products. I mean, you wouldn't find CLT in there, but possibly like LVL and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm not fully aware of all the changes, but I have the same understanding. I also know that many suppliers are providing their own 3604 tables. So I know that some ULAM suppliers have their own table, which any person using 3604 can use to use engineered wood products in it. I agree, however, that CLT might not be one of them at this stage.
Not yet, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So one question here from William is, the timber research appears to be only centered on structural applications. Is there any other research outside the structural use, for example, timber using in insulation? Are you aware of any work on that, or where people can find this information?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I probably have a little bias towards the structural end of things, but both for the surveys, both of the surveys did ask a lot of questions, or also included other products, you know, cladding, non-structural stuff. So there is some information in those reports, not just purely structural. I guess in the end, the surveys had a focus, the responses had a high interest in the structural stuff, you know, the CLT, the LVL, the glue lam. In terms of research, there definitely is some work going on, and one project with Scion and Brands is looking at wood fiber insulation, and I think that project is underway. It's not finalized, but certainly if you check with Scion, they tend to look at some of those different applications of materials and innovations and things like that. So certainly they would be the place I would look to expand beyond the structural. I mean, you know, Brands, I mean, we look at the structural stuff, obviously, but also the durability. And as I mentioned, fasteners, corrosion, treatments, the thermally modified timber. So there is work in those spaces, and we certainly look at things like, timber cladding systems and weather tightness and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, thank you, David, on that. Excuse me, there's another question which is not necessarily related to timber, but is a bit more generic, but refers to your position perhaps at Brands. The question is if the Brands wind zone calculator will be updated according to the new wind standard, the 2021 version of 1170.2.
My understanding is yes. I don't know when, but I can talk to Roger Shelton, who has his finger on that pulse. But yeah, that was my understanding.
Thank you. And so there's two last questions here, which are aligned with the first one, which is about where this information you have presented today is going to be available. So first of all, the recording of the webinar will be made available in the next few days. So just check back on our homepage. David has agreed to have the slides PDF'd and sent to all your attendees, and perhaps we can also put a link on the webpage as well. But David, I think you also have produced a report. Is this report freely available on this research on the survey outcomes?
Yes, and the links to those are in the presentation. So the one sits on the Brands website. That was the 2019 one, and then the 2022 survey report is on the Mid-Rise Construction website, but both links are included in this, so that'll be part of the PDF, or if they want to check out the recording as well. But yep, they're both available.
Perfect. That essentially are all of the questions for now. So maybe one or the other comes in. So David, my side, obviously you have done two different surveys in the arch of 2-3 years apart. What's your feeling? Like what's going on? Like what's the trend you can see just from a more holistic perspective? What's going on in the New Zealand timber industry at the moment?
Well, I think there's effort going in the right directions, and to me there are, as the sort of the summary there, I think things are moving in the right direction. We are seeing more interest, we are seeing more knowledge dissemination. The webinar series, they're becoming more and more common, and more attendees, as you said. The demographic is also including, a greater range of folks, age groups and industry players. So yeah, in general, and I guess too, it feels like, whereas previously, I think people just wanted information, we want to know more, but now people know what they need. And so that they're more specific about, yes, we need, training on the design software, or we need economic information to be included with those case studies. So it's like the audience is getting a bit more refined about what they need. And so I think we're seeing that it's getting more specific, which helps us to know what we can do. How should we, focus webinars or research or whatever. So, yeah, it's almost like, people are uptaking the information, they are getting more educated, they are using that knowledge. And then, of course, they want more knowledge and more information and want to know how to use things. So, yeah, I mean, that's the trend that I've seen from these two. I'm pretty excited to, see what the upcoming years have. I hope we don't burn people out with too many surveys, but, hopefully we can keep there's enough interest out there that we can keep it going and try to, get that longitudinal understanding.
Yeah, thank you. So we'd appreciate your answer, and it also encourages us, TDS, Brands, and TDC, and then all the other organizations you have mentioned as well, to do more of what we're doing. And that's exactly the same feedback I'm receiving as well. Attending or participating in different events. So we have two more questions, so I'm going to read them out and then probably call it quits. So the first one is, there seems to be much more interest on timber bridges in New Zealand. And the question is if there's if any of the ongoing or planned durability research will be applicable to external timber, and I guess specific for timber bridges. So I don't know if you have feedback on that.
Well, I think the timber durability research that's going on at brands right now is quite focused on exterior environments. So I think that will be relevant to that, as well as the corrosion stuff that's going on. So even though it's not sort of targeting bridges, I think it will be relevant and useful there. And the exposure sites are all over the country. And they're also looking at things even like geothermal impacts on timber and the fastenings. So yeah, I think that stuff will be relevant for bridges. I mean, I know our next Timber Design Journal has a bridge article as well. So, you know, I think it does seem to be something that's gaining traction.
And yeah, I can perhaps add a little bit more. So I'm involved in a timber bridge project with Walker Kotahi, and obviously the durability question has been raised. There is sufficient data available of timber having a durability of 50 years, but bridges often require 100 years. And so Walker Kotahi is working with Scion and other industry players on addressing that. But there is also publication by Scion actually looking at timber bridges. And so far we have examples which are lasting for 60 years and they're performing relatively well. So I would say watch the space, more will be coming here. And it's effectively an area where there's a lot of interest. And in fact, this afternoon, for instance, there's another roundtable around this topics with Walker Kotahi to addressing what can be done in timber bridges. Right, David, the last question is back to carbon and LCA, so life cycle assessment. And the question here is, if there is more research on how to include biogenic carbon of timber over the life cycle of a building, and there is specific reference made to beyond the EPD data, which is available, and the reference also to dynamic life cycle assessment. So the question is how to assess carbon sequestration potential of timber, like what's the work being done in that space?
I'd have to say I'm not 100% sure. I think the work that we've done and are doing at brands, you know, a lot of it is around these tools and you know, evaluating the carbon for different types of buildings. I'm not really sure where it's going beyond that. I think Scion is doing some work in that space. And I think the other focus or the other topic that's becoming more common and the answers need to be around wood waste and what's happening with end of life stuff. So I think there's going to be a focus on that. And I'm not sure if that'll be research done at brands or, you know, as I mentioned, there's some of that work going on at University of Auckland. But beyond that, I'm not 100% sure, but it is becoming more of an important issue. But I'd have to say that the carbon stuff and where it's sort of the directions it's going, I'm not familiar, but there are folks at brands. If someone wants to contact me, I can put you in touch with the people that are working in that space specifically and see if they can answer your questions more, you know, more succinctly.
Thank you, David. And my understanding is as well, there's some work required and work is underway from different entities. But I think there's still a bit of a lack of common understanding, with the understanding of the common understanding, because different countries and different entities might have different opinions how the carbon or the biogenic carbon is being accounted for. And as you pointed out, the end of life is a big question mark in terms of how that can be properly assessed and passed on in this calculation. So I think more work is necessary here. We have already done quite some progress over the last maybe 1 or 2 years, and I think more is to come moving forward. Well, thank you, David, again for the presentation and for the Q&A session as well. We have covered all the answers we have received from the audience. So thanks again. Thank you, Namir and Katin, for hosting and organizing the event. And yeah, looking forward to the next webinar in a month's time. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.